thinking about just the benefits CFS had to me, and feel like have to a lot of people, is it teaches you about such a sense of community, sort of a much broader spectrum than yourself, and it sort of positions you in the world in a way where you're not necessarily looking at through your own lens. It's sort of a community lens, because you do learn about yourself. You sort of learn about your connection with the world, your connection with others, your connection with the local community, your connection with a community in El Salvador, or Africa, or Trinidad, or all these great end-of-year trips where you really get sort of submerged into a different world beyond yourself.
I would actually argue that maybe there is no life after Friends School. And once you're a part of Friends School, you're always a part of Friends School. We all still talk. We're all still hanging out together. We all do stuff for New Year's and go to games together, and it's a bond that we all created here at Friends School that we still cherish today. I think CFS puts you in unique situations. They kind of push you to be your best. They influence you to say, hey, why don't you take these steps that you normally wouldn't?
In looking at the mission statement, it seems like that what's talked about there are things like truth, collaboration, creativity, things that you can't test for, you can't really, you can teach. I do believe that they're teachable skills, but they're hard to examine. Those are the skills that I most value in my bosses, in my people who report to me, and my collaborators. It's those softer skills that I feel like are most missing in my workplace life, and it's the thing that I most value that my kids are getting here. I guess I feel like the hard skills are what is usually emphasized. And, learning about algebra is really important, but learning about how to work with a team of people is even more important and harder to pick up on your own.
CFS really teaches us how to approach teachers and have a relationship with them. I remember actually in graduate school, I'm sitting there and everyone's kind of like, oh no, the professors they're there. We're here, they're there. And it's kind of like, well, go knock on the door. They're human. They wake up every morning. They have a cup of coffee just like we do. They were very approachable and took a great interest. And they're students who were like family. I mean, we are like family.
My brother also graduated from Friends School 9 years ahead of me, and one of the things he always has said is that when we were in high school, the most interesting friends we had were Friends School kids, because they would come to the table and talk to him. Whereas, and I think a lot of it comes from that same feeling, is that not only were they very confident in talking to adults and but they were also confident in who they were and what they were doing. And I think that's one of the things that was really valuable to me, that has really stuck with me. And some of that's feeling comfortable in who I was and being supported and figuring that out, but also being allowed to say, well, I want to do something a little different. I mean, I think a lot of people do that when they're at Friends School, and I did, an independent study. I came to Annie sort of similar. It was like, I don't know how to dance, but I really like to, and you can do those things. And I think that is a skill that really carries forward, so that when you're in more traditional programs, like even when I was in medical school and others, I could say, well, I really want to do it exactly that way. Can I do it this way and still meet the same criteria? And there really are opportunities like that. You just have to have enough confidence and have the sort of creativity to think that way. And I think that was something that definitely came from Friends School for me.
I was sitting in Jamie Hischlin's classroom, reminiscing back to his classes, and just, you really don't notice it at the time, but how much it really shapes your life. And aside from my passion for Bob Dylan that probably stemmed directly from Jamie, he's who sort of exposed me to English and to philosophy, and that ultimately became my major in college, which ultimately steered me to law school and the career I'm engaged in now. I really think it is the little pieces of CFS that may not show up in a grade or a degree down the road, but that really do shape who you become and what you do down the road.
How many of us still hang out with our friends from middle school, our friends from high school, and maybe work with them? Maybe our godparents to their kids now. I mean, it's these relationships that we've forged are incredibly strong and very binding, and it's really cool. It's really unique, I think.
I live in Carrboro, Chapel Hill, and we moved here from the poorest part of Texas. I realized very, very early that what they didn't have here was any family. We were living in this place, we had no family, no roots here at all. And that was the thing that was the most valuable to me for my children, and I think it's hard to even talk about that because this is their family. I mean, they love their family, but this is their family. When my son got married, half the people there were his friends from friend school. In his wedding party, the person that married him was Leah, his friend from middle school, from friend school. It was a clear example of community.
Getting the chance, I think, as a high schooler to travel was just like insane. Just to see the world from a different perspective, and then to have, again, this community to come back to get to kind of analyze and support what that experience was like. So it was just really, I think for me that like, what is community and how can we be kind of true to it, involved in it, look at it from a justice perspective. I got that foundation here.
I ran into half of my high school advisory group at Goodfellows on Franklin Street over winter break, and we just kind of pushed everyone else we were with aside and made our own table, and the next 2 hours was just my high school advisory group sitting together. And it was like, I haven't seen half of these people in 4 years. Some of them are 2 years younger than me, some of them are 2 years older than me, and even 4 years later, that sense of togetherness and community is still there. It's incredible, really. No one else that was with us understood at all what that was, because their homerooms were just where they started the day and took attendance for the day, and they didn't get that we had this kind of mentoring relationship for 4 years.
You don't go to many academic learning environments where you have such a vertically integrated community, from little children to old people.
That's true.
And they're bumping into each other all the time and interacting in a way that they don't think about it. But our schools are very horizontal and factory segregated, the way most educational systems are. To have a campus where you have 3-year-olds to 70-year-olds that are all vitally important and equally valued is a huge part of the education that is part of that. I think that soft skill thing. I mean, you just would never think about not being able to interact with somebody in these different groups, because you do it all the time.
There clearly is the standard academics that you need to learn, and the learning skills and learning to write and all those things that were really important. But I think being forced to sit in a room and be able to express your emotions about difficult things, everything from planned discussions to when there were life events. There was whether it's an illness in a student or it's something that happens, we would come together and talk about it, and those can be really uncomfortable conversations. And I think as you're growing, especially as an adolescent, learning to express yourself and trying to process and hearing other people process differently, and having your educators who you think of as friends, rightly so, are able to help you through that. And I think that's probably, to me, what helped that community sense much more so than a classroom. I mean, I've had many great classes in my life, but very rarely beyond friend school would I talk about deep sort of emotional feelings or how I interpreted an experience in the way that I ever did at friend school.
Whoa, okay. I think friend school really they've always supported following what you're interested in, even if it's like wildly random, to trust yourself and know what you're interested in. And I was randomly interested in turning bowls or something. My mom randomly gave me a number of someone. Anyways, long story short, I ended up hanging out at this wood shop, and this guy taught me how to turn bowls, and that's now where I have worked for like 3 years. And I randomly, just like super random, sort of stumbled upon it, but I don't think it's really that random, because I was just doing what I like to do and trying to keep doing it, and then that sort of evolved.
I visited Bucknell University in central Pennsylvania, which was completely random, but I fell in love with the campus. And I went to Anthony Clay, who was in here earlier, who was my guidance counselor, and told him I wanted to go. And he said, okay, no one's ever applied there before. I said, okay, I want to go early decision to Bucknell, and put the steps together, put the pieces together. You wrote a glowing recommendation, and got in with the first wave of applicants. So just because it's a smaller school and colleges don't necessarily know about CFS, if we don't have a pre-existing relationship, didn't affect us at all. And the relationships and the community that I built with a couple of my teachers seemed to go a really long way. So the earlier part of the process was really smooth, and I was happy that I had the decision to go anywhere, even if it was totally new grounds for CFS.
My transition was completely random, and it was what I'm hearing from a lot of different people, and what I think I hear from my kids a lot too, is that a lot of where they wind up is completely serendipitous or not predicted from where they started. And I think that that's a real skill to be able to sort of follow serendipity and follow where you go and take advantage of opportunities that come up, and be constantly reevaluating where you are and who you are and what you want to do. And I actually left Friends School and went to a little school called New College, intending to be a literature and language major, and took organic chemistry on a dare. And was probably the only person in the history of the school to edit the newspaper and take organic chemistry at the same time, which is a terrible combination of things to do. And was not particularly good at it, at organic chemistry, that is. And did not have teachers were telling me how good I was at literature and languages, and people were not telling me how good I was at organic chemistry. And I wound up making, not chemistry, but biology my major, and going off in that direction because I really loved it as I started doing it. Through a lot of other series of very serendipitous events, wound up working in antivirals and have loved it. I mean, it really turned out to be an area where I feel like it's very creative. It's it's a really very fun, very collaborative, very team-based kind of job. But it was very random. It was as random as metalworking because you wanted to make a barrel.
The awesome thing about Friends School that I think all of us have expressed too is that you don't have to see yourself as just one thing. You have the opportunity to do dances, also be an athlete. You don't have to peg yourself in any one way, which can be kind of crazy making, because then you're like, who am I and what am I supposed to do? But it keeps your options open for a long time, and it makes you more curious and willing to try different things.
Friends School made me really good at deciding what I like and what I don't like, and how to be true to myself and change my path without going back steps, and how that kind of uncertainty, and made me really comfortable with that to a point where I can just build on that kind of uncertainty and change and the path forward, I think. Whereas a lot of people change their major and then everything is lost. And for me, it's kind of like, this is all the path. And I think that kind of the truth is continuously revealed is kind of one of the best things I got out of Friends School.
This is a privilege, to be a part of this community, to be able to either afford to be here or be granted the opportunity to be here. And what I hear, and what I have to always remind myself, because people say, well, Friends School is not scalable. It's not something you can do everywhere. Everyone can't have that education, which is true. But what does happen is it creates all these people who then go out and make that impact for other people.
I would say there's also something special about this particular Friends School that sets it apart from other Friends Schools. I have a lot of friends that have come from the Northeast and are familiar with Sidwell Friends School in DC, and are much more familiar with Friends Schools, and there is something different I've learned when describing my high school from what they know about Friends Schools and their friends that went to Friends Schools and what their experiences were. And I think that community is a part of what we have here that isn't necessarily present in more, I don't want to say kind of commercialized, but more, the intent here is more community and personal growth rather than just running a really good school. It's kind of raising really good students and people. And I think that's kind of, I would hazard to say, unique about Carolina Friends School over the Friends School model in other iterations.
There was a teacher here named Bob Folks when I was a student here, who was pretty tough, and he was the one guy who I most wanted to impress. And we took an advanced senior class with him. There were, I think, 5 or 6 of us in the class, and it was on Thomas Jefferson and the election of 1800. And I loved it and learned everything there was to know about Thomas Jefferson and the election of 1800, and wrote this brilliant paper that he agreed was brilliant. And then he failed me, of course, because I didn't come to the last day of the class and share the paper with my classmates. And he refused to take back that not passing grade because he said I guess I would say it was a hard lesson in soft skills. He said, no, you let your class down, you didn't come and share it with your class, and yes, you learned all this and you did a really good job, and I appreciate that and accept that, but you didn't participate as part of this class and part of the community, and that to me is failing. And so he refused to pass me in the class.
Could you go from a school where you had no grades, you just got these page-long letters, and then you went into an academic environment? And I actually knew I wanted to be pre-med, so I did a pretty traditional path, but it actually was fine. And I think part of it was, I kind of knew what I was getting into, that it was going to be a transition. So, and I'm also a little bit of a type A, not surprisingly, in that field, like that I knew I was going to have to be ready. But I think the bigger things that really carried forward, it was the things we've talked about of, you learn at Friends School to be a learner and to learn for, you're responsible yourself. If you don't, you can study as hard as you want and write a brilliant paper, but if you don't come the last day, you're not going to pass. I didn't quite have that experience, but it would definitely, thankfully, I think I might have lost it. But I think the same is true. You can get an A on a paper, but if you have a page-long thing that says, well, she didn't pay attention in class, she didn't really work with her other classmates, and she turned in her homework late, and blah, blah. That really, you're held accountable in a way that you really aren't at other schools.
I was a lifer. My sisters were lifers. We had, I think, 39 years of CFS education between the 3 of us. And then, none of us had grades, no one in our family and the siblings. And you get there and you're like, oh, you just do the work, you write the paper, you take the test, you study, and you get an A. It's as simple as that.
Exactly.
So, it's not as scary as you think it's going to be.
One of my freshman year 350 student lecture, my econ professor was then my reference for a job I applied to junior year because this is the Friends School cliche at this point. I was brave enough to talk to my professor in my 300-person class, and then he was my reference 3 years later, and it really happens, and it's the soft skills you were talking about. It really does make a difference, and I didn't care how many other kids were in the class. I still wanted to talk to the professor and to know, I don't care what my grade on the test was, because that's I learned their biggest pet peeve. I had to clarify, I don't care what my grade was, I just want to know why I got all these problems wrong. And that went a long way to building rapport with professors, because that's what they're there for, is to teach us and not to give us A's and B's. They want us to learn, presumably what their profession is or their skill set is.
I think as a 18-year-old person, you don't really know yourself that well, and you don't know the world at all, really. And I think it's just important to understand that it's not the world goes on and you'll be fine, and this is sort of part of the lessons you learn, and it really is just part of the process, even if it seems hard, and certainly as an 18-year-old it feels like the whole world's crashing down. It can be tough, and that in and of itself can be a great lesson going forward.